Taking care of my father-in-law for the rest of my days became an unexpected certainty. The bombshell dropped when my mother-in-law announced her decision to reside with me, the new daughter-in-law. Her revelation came out of nowhere, insinuating that my husband was involved in an affair, an allegation she was determined to uphold. Shockingly, they intended to move in with the mistress, abandoning my wheelchair-bound father-in-law who relied on constant care. In the face of this betrayal, abandoning my father-in-law wasn't an option. Despite the wavering circumstances, I couldn't forsake him. Then, unexpectedly, my father-in-law rose to his feet. "My name is Linda," I introduced myself. "I'm 30 years old, married to Bob, approaching our 3rd year. Initially, our relationship flourished, but lately, communication dwindled. Is this the natural progression? The deeper you delve, the more stability you seek. Our marital life lacked excitement, especially since Bob's workload intensified about a year ago. His absence became routine, replaced by business trips that grew in frequency. Despite the strain, he always provided for us, and I had my own job to focus on. Our marriage might appear mundane from the outside, but it wasn't devoid of love. Our routine became the norm. Then, one evening, Bob arrived home unusually early. His father had supposedly suffered an accident en route to his company. The revelation shook me to the core, questioning the truth behind my husband's claims. When a car brazenly ignored the red light, it plowed into him. Thankfully, he escaped with non-fatal injuries, but the aftermath left him paralyzed in both legs and one arm, confining him to a life in a wheelchair. "My father-in-law had an accident," I exclaimed, disbelief coloring my words. The image of him, once a lover of hiking and fishing, now bound to a wheelchair, struck a poignant chord. He had always treated me like his own daughter, offering unwavering support and guidance. An avid outdoorsman, my father-in-law ran his own company separate from my husband's place of employment. The news of his accident reached us through my mother-in-law, as the constraints of modern life limited our ability to visit as often as we desired. Amidst the turmoil, my husband broached the subject with a grave expression. "Linda, Mom approached me about Dad," he began, his tone somber. "She's struggling to care for him alone, and asked if we could lend a hand." I paused, grappling with the weight of the request. While I held deep affection for my father-in-law, agreeing to take on a role I had never assumed before wasn't a decision to be made lightly. "It's not that I don't care," I explained, "but I have my own job to consider. It's a sudden and significant responsibility." I was at a loss. Despite racking my brain for the best solution, no viable ideas emerged. Sensing my distress, Bob gently took my hand and locked eyes with me. "Linda, I need you," he declared earnestly. "I know it's going to be challenging, especially since it's your first time. But if we rely solely on Mom, I fear she might reach her breaking point." Although hesitant, I weighed his words carefully. "I understand it'll be tough," I replied, "but I have my own job, Bob." "Linda, you can quit your job," he proposed, surprising me. "I'll cover our expenses. Can you dedicate yourself to caring for Mom and Dad?" The notion of quitting my job caught me off guard, but Bob's conviction swayed me. "Yes," I finally relented. "I'll support you and our family." Bob's gratitude was palpable as he pleaded with me, kneeling before me, emphasizing the importance of my commitment. Eventually, I acquiesced, resigning from my job to focus on caring for my father-in-law, just as Bob had requested. A few days later, Bob dropped another bombshell. He intended to take over his father's company and become its president. The announcement stunned even his father, though a glimmer of pride shone through his tears. "Bob, I can't believe you're saying this," he exclaimed emotionally. "After all this time of you refusing to join the company, while it feels like a game of hearts all over again." "Dad, I can't simply abandon the company," Bob explained earnestly, "especially not now, given your condition. Thank you for your understanding. I was unsure what to do with the company." The weight of responsibility now rested squarely on our shoulders. But with determination and unity, we faced the challenges ahead. I had initially planned to entrust it to someone I could rely on. "But if you're willing to step up, I'm more than happy to pass the torch," my father-in-law declared. "I knew you agreed, Dad," Bob responded earnestly. "I'll give it my all as your son." "Yes, I'm counting on you," his father replied. For the sake of the employees who followed me, please ensure a positive work environment. With that, Bob assumed control of his father's company, while my father-in-law transitioned from president to chairman. Traditionally, the chairman holds numerous responsibilities, but my father-in-law opted to entrust all operational aspects to Bob, retaining only his title. 2 months elapsed since Bob's takeover, and every night he returned home well past midnight. Initially, I attributed it to the demands of adjusting to his new role, but the persistent late hours raised suspicions. What's more, one night, as I struggled to sleep, I detected a peculiar scent emanating from my husband. Venturing to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard the front door creak open. Rushing to greet him, I detected the unmistakable fragrance of soap. "Welcome home," I greeted him, surprised to find him returning so late. Caught off guard, Bob stammered, "Why are you up at this hour?" "I couldn't sleep," I confessed. "You've been coming home late every night." Bob's fatigue was palpable as he explained, "I've taken over Dad's business, and there's so much I still need to learn." Sympathizing with his struggles, I bid him good night, but as he turned to leave, the scent of soap lingered, sparking a moment of doubt. I seized his arm, my tone stern as I interrogated him. "Bob, who do you usually work overtime with?" His response was defensive. "What? Why the sudden questioning?" I pressed on. "I noticed a distinct scent on you." "Why should I know?" Bob retorted sharply. "I'm working tirelessly. Don't bother me with trivial matters." His irritation only fueled my suspicions, leaving me at a loss for how to proceed. Bob sighed, exasperated. "Can you please stop? I come home exhausted, and the last thing I need is an interrogation." "I didn't mean to," I protested, feeling the weight of his accusation. "I was just curious." But Bob's frustration mounted. "So you're doubting me? We're living comfortably because I work like this every day. Do you understand?" I nodded, chastened. "I understand," I murmured. But before I could say more, he dismissed me, storming off upstairs. Alone in the living room, I tried to reconcile our exchange, but Bob's indifference stung. The following day, my mother-in-law confronted me, her expression ominous. "Linda, I heard you suspected Bob of cheating yesterday." I didn't suspect Bob of anything, I simply inquired about his overtime companions. But my mother-in-law saw it differently, accusing me of stirring up trouble. "You're only able to live comfortably because Bob works so hard," she snapped, her words a stinging rebuke. All I did was voice a concern. I defended myself, but she dismissed it as rudeness, labeling me as the worst kind of wife. Her tirade left me stunned, and before I could respond, she dumped all the housework on me and stormed out. It was no secret that my mother-in-law had never been fond of me. Despite putting on a facade of sharing household responsibilities in front of my husband and father-in-law, I was the one who shouldered the burden of chores and caregiving. My mother-in-law often found reasons to be out during the day, returning only in the evening. My father-in-law, confined to his room, remained oblivious to her frequent absences. I was even cautioned by her not to disclose unnecessary information to my father-in-law and Bob. Left with no choice, I silently attended to the household tasks and caregiving duties. The only solace was the company of my father-in-law, whose presence provided some measure of comfort amidst the turmoil. I did something he wouldn't expect. As he looked at me with a sorrowful expression, my father-in-law uttered those words I never anticipated. "Linda, I'm sorry. You must hate looking after an old man like me, right?" With sincerity, I responded, "That's not true at all. I think of you, my father-in-law, as my own father. It's an honor to assist you, and hearing you say such things makes me feel fortunate." His gratitude warmed my heart. "I'm really glad that someone like you married Bob," he confessed. "And likewise," I replied, genuinely touched. "I'm grateful to have a kind person like you as my father-in-law." Despite the hurtful words and actions of my husband and mother-in-law, the presence of my father-in-law, who relied on me, kept me going. It became my duty to attend to his needs, such as helping him prepare for bed and turning off the lights. One day, my husband and mother-in-law unexpectedly arrived together. My husband wore a smug expression, hinting that something was amiss. My mother-in-law wasted no time in dropping a bombshell. They intended to live with a new daughter-in-law, leaving me behind to care for my father-in-law. Stunned, I struggled to comprehend. My husband handed me divorce papers, admitting to having a girlfriend and insisting that I remain to look after his father. Overwhelmed, I sank to my knees, feeling utterly hopeless as they packed their belongings, leaving me in tears. Just as despair threatened to consume me, my father-in-law wheeled into the room, concerned about the commotion. Through tears, I relayed the heartbreaking conversation. Earlier, I had mustered the courage to confide in my father-in-law. His expression grew increasingly rigid as I recounted the events, and by the time I finished, a determined glint had replaced the stiffness in his eyes. Rising abruptly, he declared with newfound strength, "Linda, it's time for a counterattack." Perplexed, I watched as he struggled to stand, his next words taking me by surprise. "Your legs? I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. The truth is, I've been able to walk for some time now." His revelation left me speechless, but he reassured me. "It's okay. Leave everything to me. The groundwork has already been laid." From a drawer, my father-in-law retrieved a large brown envelope, revealing its contents to me. Inside were various pieces of evidence documenting my husband's infidelity, along with shocking proof of my mother-in-law's involvement in extramarital affairs as well. It turned out that since Bob had assumed the presidency, my father-in-law had entrusted reliable employees to monitor his actions at the company. Despite my husband's claims of working late, the surveillance revealed his habitual early departures. Suspecting foul play, my father-in-law had engaged a private investigator, leading to the unraveling of both my husband's and mother-in-law's affairs. The woman my husband was involved with was someone familiar to his mother, and their clandestine meetings were exposed. These revelations had only recently come to light, and my father-in-law confessed his struggle in deciding when to disclose the truth to me. "It's blunt, but I'm glad," I managed to articulate, overwhelmed by the weight of his revelation and the courage it took to confront the truth. "I can't believe it, Linda. What do you want to do?" My father-in-law's voice was tinged with anger. "I want to get back at those two," I replied firmly. "Leave it to me," he assured me before dialing a number on his smartphone. It seemed he was contacting someone from his company, and shortly after, my husband was demoted from his CEO position. Following my father-in-law's advice, I submitted the divorce papers armed with the evidence of my husband's affair. Through legal channels, I sought compensation from both Bob and his lover. A week later, Bob visited his parents' house, likely in response to the legal proceedings. Upon seeing us, he immediately adopted a defensive stance. "What's going on, Dad? Just because I cheated, you're stripping me of my CEO position." My father-in-law's response was swift and unforgiving. "Shut up. You neglected my care and hurt Linda. It's far too early for a scumbag like you to hold a leadership position." Bob's pleas fell on deaf ears as my father-in-law disowned him. Desperate, Bob dropped to his knees, begging me to reconsider. "Linda, please. I'll end the affair and drop the compensation claim. Just convince Dad to let me stay." His words only fueled my disillusionment. Despite his tears and pleas, it was clear Bob was only concerned with saving himself. With a heavy heart, I released the pent-up frustration that had been building inside me. I spoke with conviction, cutting through Bob's pleas. "What are you talking about? Retract the divorce? I never asked for that. Frankly, I feel liberated knowing I'm divorcing a scumbag like you. I'll never go back to being your wife." Bob seemed stunned. "You mean you've already filed the divorce papers?" Of course, I affirmed, my resolve unwavering. "Why would I willingly remain married to someone as terrible as you? Your firing as CEO is solely your own fault, the result of the seeds you've sown." As Bob pleaded and begged for forgiveness, I remained resolute, dismissing him with a gesture. I threw him out of the house, his cries echoing in the night, pleading for help and forgiveness. Neither my father-in-law nor I responded to his pleas. Later, Bob and my mother-in-law faced lawsuits for alimony and were eventually evicted from their mistress's home, left homeless and destitute. They were forced to take menial jobs to survive, while I continued to care for my father-in-law in his home. Despite the divorce, my father-in-law welcomed me to stay as long as I wished. Grateful for his kindness, I made the decision to reside in my in-laws' home. With my father-in-law now attending a daycare service during the day, I have begun working to support us both. The road ahead may be challenging, but I am determined to do whatever it takes to care for my father-in-law and ensure his well-being.